I am so honored to be invited to be part of this community. We're going to talk about the soul of a movement today, and I am not talking about micro movement, so if you came and you were wanting to move your bodies, like that's not my thing, but you can go to one of those great yoga classes. We're going to talk about macro movement, so essentially creating and sustaining values-driven movements of change. So yeah, let's do it. For us and for me and my work, it started with a tweet. Now, raise your hand if you're on Twitter. Anybody on Twitter? So like maybe like a third of us. Those third of us that are on Twitter, we know it's a lot of things. For people in politics, it's kind of the preferred public piazza of politicos. That's a lot of P words. But it's really where politicos live and breathe and argue and fight and connect. But it can be a really useful tool if you're trying to build a movement, if you know how to listen. And so before I get into the details of the meat of this tweet and how the people that I work with were able to build a movement around a particular problem with a solution, just a little bit about what I do. So Regina mentioned I'm the executive director of a nonprofit. We are a grassroots advocacy group, and you can kind of think of us like lobbyists for everyday people in Arkansas. So there's a lot of lobbyists for a lot of special interests, but kind of really nobody looking out for us sitting here. So that's what we do. We connect the dots between people and policy, how policy impacts people's lives on an everyday basis. We also hold our elected leaders accountable. And we do work to fight for policy and change that is going to tangibly make people's lives better in this state. That's a really core principle of the work that we do, because we vehemently believe that when we can live healthy, whole lives, that all of our communities benefit, that we benefit from that, we're safer, our communities are fairer, when everyone has a chance to thrive. But there's kind of a problem, because we live in Arkansas, as many of you know. So, yeah, it's problematic here sometimes. And we could talk, this could be a whole talk on the problems of Arkansas, but we're not going to do that, because we're going to talk about positive things. But a quick snapshot of our state. We're mostly rural. We're not rural here in Fayetteville, but most of the state is rural, which kind of leads into the second one. We're kind of naturally disengaged because of that. People are spread out. People have jobs. They have lives. They have things to do. They're not necessarily paying attention to what's happening at the local and state level. And that's kind of where we come in. We like to tell them about that. And people are also discouraged, and that's because we are living through an incredibly poisonous time of national political rhetoric. I'm sure you all know that. And often people become disengaged because that is a big turnoff. National political rhetoric is a big turnoff to even being engaged at what's happening in your local community. And so what do you do about this? How do you actually take a group of rural, disengaged people who are feeling discouraged about politics and get them involved in an issue? Well, the good news is that there's a way to do that. So today we're going to talk about SOUL, and that's my little acronym for how we built this movement that we were a part of. And really, when you have a problem, which is people's lives need to be better, you've got to find a solution. And in order to find a solution, you need to kind of connect those two with a bridge. And in our experience, that bridge was people power. So people-powered social change to make people's lives better. So SOUL stands for Seek a Solution, Organize and Occupy, Unite Around Values, and then Lead. And so that's kind of the bread and butter of the movement that we were able to build. And I was telling you about that tweet before. So the problem that we found from that one tweet, it was just a personal tweet on my page. It wasn't my work page, but The context at the time is in the summer of last year, which feels like a million years ago, then Governor Asa Hutchinson was going to call a special session for lawmakers to come into the state capitol. And one of the agendas was, how do we spend this unprecedented $1.6 billion surplus that the state had accumulated through various means, but a lot of those were like COVID federal funding dollars and just one-time pot of cash. How are we going to spend it? And he had proposed increasing teacher salaries in Arkansas. So we have and had really abysmal starting teacher pay in this state. It was $36,000 a year for starting teachers in some areas, and that is very low, especially when you consider how hard teachers work and how much of their lives they pour into that. So he said, hey, let's do this at this special session where we're addressing how to spend this money. And lawmakers were like, nah, we're good. We don't, present company excluded, I should say, because we have some lawmakers here. They said no. They were like, no, we're good. Instead, we're going to accelerate and speed up these tax cuts for top earners and corporations that we already passed. We're just going to use this time to speed that up instead. So here's this juxtaposition between, hey, teachers are struggling. We've got this teacher shortage. It's not a living wage for teachers. We could be helping them, but instead we're going to just look out for the folks at the top. And that really struck a nerve, if you can imagine. And Twitter, again, being that town square, we saw that. We saw the reaction to that. People were upset. But it also became a place where we could find a solution. Shout out to maybe somebody in here that maybe made this graphic. So the solution was simple. The solution to the problem to make teachers' lives better, pay them a decent base salary, a decent base starting salary. How about $50,000? That's a big bump from $36,000 a year. And it was echoed across Twitter. People started joining in with this idea that yes, teachers are worthy of being paid a living wage. They deserve it. They've waited too long. We need to prioritize this. So let's give teachers a raise. That became the solution. Now, how do you take stuff that happens on Twitter and turn it into like real life, living, breathing things, a mechanism for actual change? Well, this is where the hard work starts, because anybody can get on Twitter and pontificate about a solution. So the way that you get the solution into an actual movement is you've got to organize and you've got to occupy. And it sounds simple enough. It's pretty hard work. It's unglamorous work. It's unsexy work. There are people in this room that do this type of work on a regular basis. And organizing is really just providing practical on-ramps for participation for as many people as possible. You want to make it as simple as possible, as accessible as possible to have people become involved. And there are so many ways that you can do that. For us, for our people, it started really simple. We had an online petition. Now, online petitions, you fill them out, you add your name, and it goes to lawmakers, and it says, hey, we demand X, Y, and Z. Well, that's not going to actually affect a policy outcome, but what that does do is it provides a really simple way for someone to add their name and take ownership and become part of the movement instantly. So that's how we started. And then it grew from there. We began coalition building. We began recruiting people who were already involved in the public education advocacy space. We invited them to one big table virtually. We got stakeholder feedback. We centered the voices and the experiences of public school educators, because they're the people for whom this policy impacts most. And we used that to create more on-ramps for participation. And some examples of how we did this is we provided a toolkit for people, a digital toolkit. It was available to anybody online, open source, and it provided really simple things like our core message. How do you answer questions about the policy that we want? We want teacher raises. Well, what does that actually look like? We provided really basic media training for people. So a public school educator could go in front of a camera and do an interview with a local news station and feel equipped and empowered to tell their story. We provided shareable graphics. We provided talking points. So then these public school educators could go into their communities from all over the state, from all 75 counties, and they could share with their colleagues in their school district and talk about, hey, you know what? Did you know this is happening? Did you know that they had this chance to give us pay raises and they didn't? What do you think about that? Do you think you want to be part of maybe helping to change that? So creating more and more on-ramps of participation by empowering the people who are the trusted messengers, in this case, public school educators. And that leads us to the second point, which is occupy. So if you want to be successful in organizing and building a movement that has soul, you have to take up space. You've got to take up a lot of space. And historically, teachers have been left out of these spaces. And that's not teachers' faults. It's not teachers' faults that they've been doing that. They are busy pouring into the next generation of Arkansans, teaching and building Arkansans how to be excellent residents and students and community members. They're busy. So we had to think creatively about how we can occupy space that also accommodated these teachers. We had a big rally, and it was in the summer. It was approaching the beginning of the school year, but we hit a window where most teachers were available to come. And we made it a rally that was accessible to people who've never participated in a political rally before. We had food trucks, we had a marching band, we invited anyone. We had speakers from across the aisle on both sides of political parties. And we really made it a family event where anyone was welcome, as long as you shared the value that you thought public school educators deserved better pay. And then we showed up in the spaces where lawmakers were making the laws. This was really fun. It's really disruptive. It's really fun from an organizing standpoint. It's probably not so fun from a lawmaking standpoint. We inserted ourselves into these spaces, and truly, these are spaces where all of you belong. You all have a right to be there. You all have a right to advocate for yourselves and your community as constituents. It's really the people's building, and it's the people's process. But for too long, really, those in power have not made it as accessible as they could for people to be part of this process. There's a lot of disdain sometimes. There's a lot of distrust for regular people becoming engaged in the legislative process. But every single person in this room, you have a right to go down to the Arkansas State Capitol and sit in a committee and sign up and speak. That's your right. And also, these lawmakers work for you. So we took up a lot of space. We made sure we were there where the committees were meeting. We lined the hallways and would grab people on their way to and from committees. So even if they tried to dodge us in committee, we would kind of just literally physically take up too much space in the hallways until they were asking us to move. We took up too much space in committee meetings, and then they would ask us to, only 10 of you can be in here, now you have to leave. And it was really annoying for them, but it creates really great accountability, because then for some of those people who are making these decisions, teachers are no longer a line item on a budget. They're no longer a number on a spreadsheet. They are real humans with real livelihoods sharing real stories about how these policies negatively or positively impact them. And that was really powerful. This is an example of that. We had a Take Your Teacher to the Capitol Day. And the Senate chair of the Education Committee meeting agreed to meet with us, and I do not think she thought that there were going to be 150 of us there. I thought she maybe thought there would be 10. And she took the time, to her credit, to listen to every single one of these people who wanted to speak and share how concerned they were about possibly having their schools shut down, the future of public education in their small communities. So take up space, occupy space, demand a seat at the table. Maybe they won't let you sit at the table, but then you can go in the hallway and you can accost them that way too. And this is fun. These are just some of our really lovely rock star educators that came out to our rally with some super creative signs. Yeah, this was great. We had a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. There we go. All right. Our next point is you. I cannot stress this one enough. This is unite around values. A movement is action. We know that. Action means action steps. It means goals. It means executing. But that kind of isn't sustainable or meaningful unless you have a value centering your movement. This is really critical. And I want to point out a couple of examples of some movements you probably are familiar with and talk about their values. So Black Lives Matter. What I love about this is that the movement is literally the value itself. Black lives matter. Black bodies deserve existence, respect. Black lives deserve to live. Black lives matter. The movement is the value itself. And that allows it to continue on beyond reaching particular goals that this movement may have, because this is an evergreen value. Me Too is another great example of this. The value behind Me Too is one that centers an individual experience and a collective experience. And when you put them together, it's really powerful, because the value says, I am not alone and you are not alone, and that unites us. So those two values together is what enables to propel this movement onward, continuing to grow, continuing to include more and more people into the movement of Me Too. Now, ours is not super big. We are a statewide focus group, we are a locally focused group, and we advocate, again, for regular Arkansans. So our movement was based around three values, and those were fairness, respect, and hard work. And basically, we were saying teachers work really hard, and because of that, they deserve respect and fair pay. That's the fair thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And what's great about these values is they transcend political parties. They transcend political parties, and they are very common values that many Arkansans hold. Doesn't matter if you live in the Ozarks or the Ouachitas or the Delta, Central Arkansas, South Arkansas, you can probably find someone on the street and they would agree that they value fairness, hard work, and respect. And so that was able to give us that living, breathing heartbeat that we needed to include more and more people as our movement grew. It was a big tent, and that was the only criteria. The only criteria is that you believe in those values and you believe in the goal, the solution of paying our teachers. And then lastly, we have LEAD. This one sounds like a no-brainer. In my experience, it's actually really freaking hard. And and I want to kind of talk about this because this is a nuanced take in my personal experience. So leading in progressive, forward-thinking spaces can be very challenging because there is a fear of stepping on other people's toes. There's a fear of compromising your values. And all of that is valid. All of those are valid fears. And it's because in forward-thinking grassroots organizing spaces, the people are probably a lot like the people in this room. Probably some of you are involved in grassroots organizing work or advocacy work. And it's because you are creative, empathetic, inclusive people. And you care about doing right by your neighbors, and you care about those values we talked about at the very beginning, improving people's lives, making people's lives better, sharing, experiencing community. But the problem is that sometimes that can lead to some hesitation on execution because we don't want to offend, and we feel like we need to constantly have unanimous consent from all of our stakeholders. And you do need that. You do need that when you're building your goals out. You do need that when you're defining your values. But you don't need to do that at every single decision point. Otherwise, you're going to stall. You're going to sputter out, and it's going to become these just endless meetings where Antoinette and I were just talking about this, where it's like, okay, let's just have another meeting. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. Or paralysis by analysis. Like, I don't know, let's go through that again. Is this the right thing? And the truth is if you're leading a movement or you have a team of people leading a movement, not every person in your movement is going to agree with every single goal that you're trying to execute. You're going to have people who don't like the message. You're going to have people who are like, you should not put that person in front of a camera. Or, no, that's a bad idea to hold a rally on August 9th when it's 105 degrees in Little Rock and nobody wants to be outside. But through all of that, you have to keep moving forward because you're tied to that value, right? The value is what centers the movement, and so if you build the movement around the value, you can lean into that, and that empowers you to actually execute your goals. And that's really critical with this type of work, because you don't want your movement to stall. You want it to keep going. Movement literally means action, something that is going forward. It's being propelled forward. So yes, you need those action steps, but those action steps are rooted in your value, and that should give you confidence to be able to trust your leaders, to trust yourself when you're building something out. That yes, you want to be able to center those experiences and get all of that stakeholder feedback. You want to be able to hear from people who are going to be impacted by these policies most. But you also, there's a time to execute, and you need to just do it. And it's scary. It's scary, but also that's normal. It's a normal part of it. You're going to step on toes. People are going to get their feelings hurt. This is my personal experience in this. But ultimately, you'll start to see success. You'll start to achieve some of these goals. And with that, it comes respect, right? People start to trust the movement itself. And then there's less of a like, okay, now we have to do everything that everybody's always suggesting all the time. Oh, here's some pictures. So we were able, through executing this work, I think, are some people in this photo in this room? Yes. Oh, look, they're there. We led, and we stepped on some toes, but we stuck to our values, and we saw success. Like, I really honestly cannot believe that this happened, but because of the initial work of this movement to pay our teachers, we saw, I'm going backwards, we saw every major statewide candidate who's running for office, and really I'm talking about the two people running for governor, but then a lot of state legislative races and even local candidates, amend their public platforms to include teacher raises. They changed it right before the election to include a plan to pay and fund our public schools. That is huge. We changed the conversation. And then, ultimately, the person who did win the governorship, this became her signature legislative policy, a base salary of $50,000 for teachers in Arkansas. We accomplished that goal because of the work of this movement, because the value was so broad that people could see themselves being part of it. They didn't think of it as partisan. They wanted to join. It became so noisy, they couldn't ignore us. And then they adopted it. Well, if you have your soul of your movement, if you have that value propelling you forward, you can start to have hope that you'll achieve these goals. But also what's great about having the soul tether your movement and having those values tether your movement is you can continue on. So we accomplished that $50,000 teacher pay, base teacher pay raise goal, but it doesn't end there because it came with a bunch of other stuff that we don't like. And so now one of our big goals as this movement continues to grow and flourish around fairness and responsibility and hard work, our big goal is keep public dollars in public schools. That's a biggie. It's also pay all teachers what they're worth because they work hard, not just starting teachers. So you can see how the value of your movement allows you to progress forward. It allows it to change in perpetuity so that you can continue to move forward with social change, bring more people in, and hopefully continue to achieve the goals that you want to have. So that's it for me. I'm happy to answer some questions. I don't know if you have them. Again, I can answer macro movement questions, probably not questions about moving your body. So if you have questions, just shout them out, but no pressure. It can be about anything.
Do you have any recommendations on just what you can do on a day-to-day, weekly basis to stay engaged or occupy without maybe physically?
Yes, I love that. So you can occupy these spaces. You can create space in your brain, really. You can occupy space in your brain. Read independent coverage of what's happening in state and local government. And I strongly encourage you to stick, like, don't, you can do what you want, obviously. I'm not telling you what to do, but I find it more helpful and more empowering to know what's going on top level at the state and then what's going on in my community. If you're living in Fayetteville, there's a school board race happening May 9th. Early voting starts next week. Familiarize yourself with who's running. Ask questions. Reach out to people who probably know those answers. If you don't know those answers, do not feel embarrassed. There are people who love to answer those questions for you. I'm sure they already have like copy that they can just copy and paste in a text message. I do that every year. I have that ready to go for the people who are going to reach out to me and ask me, hey, who is this candidate? Who's this? Another suggestion would be subscribe to those independent sites. So Antoinette here, she works for the Arkansas Advocate. They're a newish group that covers what goes on in the state and state government, and they have really exceptional independent reporting. Another site called the Arkansas Times. It's pretty centrally focused for Little Rock, but they also do a lot of good work. I actually, I love to read the Fayetteville Flyer. Like, they have great stuff all the time, and they'll cover elections. But really, it's just paying attention and giving yourself a little bit of time to do that, and then asking around. I tend to just ask people if it's an issue that kind of pops off, and I'm like, I don't really know about that. Say there's a judge's race. I ask my attorney friends, because I'm like, I don't know what these judges stand for. They don't have to say what they stand for. They're nonpartisan. But I'll ask attorneys, because they have experiences working with these judges. They see them in court. They know their track record, things like that. And of course, it's not all election-based, right? It's things that happen in real time. So what also I have found is that there are a lot of groups that do advocacy work at a very micro level, and familiarizing yourself with those groups in your community will really help you know who to connect with if something's, going on with a particular issue. And also, my other suggestion is to just pick 2 that you really care about, no more than that. You don't have to be the champion for everything or the guy that knows about everything that's happening. That's very overwhelming, and there are people who do that. I do that, so you don't have to do that. And just pick the couple things that you really care about and find out who's working on them and how you can help. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
Paula, what are the other movements or organizations looking at outside of just teacher pay? What's bubbling up?
Well, there are a lot. Statewide, there are a lot of groups in this space that are really issue-focused. So I'm just thinking of things that we cover. We have covered a lot of criminal justice policy that has come down the pike, and there are groups that advocate for decarceration efforts in the state. So Decarcerate is one. There's a group that has a presence here called the Bail Project. There are groups that advocate for policy that helps children and families. It's one of our oldest nonprofits in the state. Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families is great, and they have a Northwest Arkansas office. And they provide a lot of really great public service style events for people in the community, where anyone can go and sign up and hear from local community clinics on how, different healthcare policies impacting them and their work. They'll talk to teachers. They'll talk to anything that affects children and families, which is pretty much everything. What are some other groups? Y'all help me out, huh? Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. They are the group in the state. They're a national group, but we have an Arkansas chapter, and they advocate for common sense gun laws. They're not trying to take away anybody's guns, but they advocate for policy that is going to make us safer as a community. And then they also engage with gun owners and hunters and advocate for safe storage of guns by storing your firearms and your ammunition separately. And they have a lot of great programming that they do in different communities, and they have a pretty robust group here in Northwest Arkansas, and you do not have to be a mom to join it. It's for anyone. So don't be deterred by the name Moms Demand. We have a lot of great pro-immigrant groups in this community that work with Marshallese people and people in the Latinx community. Those are pretty too numerous to name off the top of my head, but they've got a really great presence in Northwest Arkansas. So, I mean, honestly, if you have an issue that you really care about, like I can connect you with the group that's probably doing that work. And if there's nobody doing that work, then maybe you should do it. I don't know. Just saying. Anything else? Yeah.
If someone did want to connect with you to ask a question after, is the best way like through your website or DMs on Twitter or?
Great question. Yes, so I've got, we have these little info cards at the check-in desk, and you can grab one. There's also stickers that you guys can grab. They're free. All of that, just take it. And we are primarily a digital space. That's where we exist. We have a website where we produce a lot of content where we kind of explain this policy that goes on here in the state and how it impacts you. We also have an email list you can sign up for, and we'll keep you informed on if there's an action step that you can take to make a difference on something. And we do things beyond public education. That's just one example of a movement that we were able to build based on this solution. But we concentrate really on anything that's going to tangibly improve the lives of Arkansans in general, not just a select few or those at the top. So that equity and that opportunity element is critical to our work. So yeah, you can sign up, grab one of those. Okay, thank you.